The market garden was too precise and that precision is exactly what made it fragile from the very beginning. The entire operation was designed around a single directional movement, where airborne units would be dropped behind enemy lines to secure a series of bridges, while ground forces advanced through one narrow corridor that connected each position in sequence, so that everything depended on that single line of advance, and nothing existed outside of it. At a structural level, this was not a flexible system, but one where movement could only continue if nothing interrupted it, because every step depended entirely on the one before it, and no part of the operation was designed to function on its own. This distinction mattered, because a system built as a chain does not slow down in part. It accumulates delay across the entire structure. So once movement begins to break at any point, everything behind it is forced to stop. There were no alternative routes, which meant that once movement slowed down, there was no way to recover it, and no parallel advances to reduce pressure on that single path, so the entire operation remained exposed to whatever friction appeared along the corridor. The corridor itself was not only narrow in geography, but narrow in possibility, exposed not just to enemy action, but to the simple reality that time, distance, and resistance do not align with even the most precise planning. What looked like coordination was actually dependence, because progress was not determined by strength or speed, but by the slowest point in the entire system, so control could only exist if every part continued to move at the exact pace required. And once that condition is required, failure is no longer a possibility. It becomes an outcome that only depends on when the system is forced to absorb pressure. Market Garden was not structured to adapt to disruption. It was structured to assume it would not happen. And once that assumption is built into the system, the limits of the operation are already defined before the first unit even reaches its objective. Once Market Garden began, the plan did not immediately collapse, but it stopped being theoretical and entered the only environment where a structure like this could be tested, which was reality. Airborne units were now in the air, ground forces were moving forward, and the operation that had looked so clean on paper was no longer a design, but a sequence of events that had to remain synchronized across distance, timing, and terrain. That was the first real pressure point, because the system did not simply require movement, it required simultaneous movement, where separate parts had to arrive, secure, advance, and connect at the exact pace the structure demanded. From that moment on, success no longer depended on whether each part could move, but on whether all of them could continue moving together. And that is where the weakness of the operation begins to appear. Some units were already moving faster than others, while certain positions were taking longer to secure than expected, not because of failure, but because real terrain, resistance, and uncertainty do not resolve at the same speed everywhere. The system was still advancing, but no longer at the same pace across all of its parts. That difference, small at first, does not remain isolated. A system built around sequence is always vulnerable to desynchronization, because it does not need total failure to begin breaking. It only needs one part to move at a different speed than the rest. The distance between units begins to stretch. The time between one objective and the next starts to expand, and what was supposed to connect in sequence begins to separate in practice. Nothing has to collapse yet for the structure to start losing coherence. It only has to stop matching itself. And once that happens, the operation is no longer being defined by planning, but by the growing gap between where each part is supposed to be and where it actually is. That gap is what transforms precision into pressure, because the more exact the structure is, the less distortion it can tolerate before the entire system begins to lose shape. Market Garden did not need a dramatic break in its opening moments to become fragile. It only needed the first signs that timing, distance, and movement were no longer aligned. And once the operation begins to drift from its own internal rhythm, the chain is still moving, but it is no longer holding together. As the operation continued, the differences in timing between units were no longer just a deviation. They began to produce visible points where the system could no longer connect as intended. Some positions that were supposed to be secured quickly remained contested longer than expected, while others advanced without being fully supported, creating gaps between parts of the operation that had originally been designed to function as a continuous line. This is where the structure begins to fail in a specific way. Not everywhere at once, and not through total collapse, but at the exact points where connection was required and could not be maintained. A system built as a chain does not lose function gradually across all its parts. It loses function at the points where continuity breaks, and once that happens, those points do not just stop contributing to the system, they begin to isolate everything connected to them. Some positions were held, but could not be reinforced. Others were taken, but could not be used. Movement continued, but no longer produced control. The plan had assumed that connection would follow capture. In reality, capture was occurring without connection. That difference changes everything. Because a position that is taken but not integrated does not strengthen the system, it weakens it. And once positions begin to exist without connection, they stop functioning as part of a larger structure and become isolated fragments that cannot support each other. From that moment on, the operation is no longer expanding as a unified system. It is stretching into separate pieces, and those pieces, once isolated, cannot hold under pressure because the system that was supposed to sustain them no longer reaches them. Market Garden does not collapse at this stage, but it loses something more important. It loses function.